Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is December 27, year 2022, 3 p.m. Pacific time. How are you today? Hopefully you've survived Christmas okay. And we're looking at New Year's 2023, just in a few days now. I'm looking forward to that. But prior to that, I should tell you, if you indulge me with just a couple of programmatic notes here, I'll be giving my talk that I've alluded to previously. This coming Thursday, it's the 29th, I'll be giving my talk on the Pasadena Tournament of Roses. And I have all kinds of exciting discoveries and insights that I will share with you. I've been working on it diligently for over a month now, and it's coming together. And I like the results. And they're tentative, of course, but I think I'm pushing the discussion much farther out than anybody would have ever imagined. I don't think the American public will be able to look at the Tournament of Roses, the Rose Parade, or the Rose Bowl in quite the same way after this coming Thursday. And then following that talk that I'm giving this coming Thursday, I'll be back with my friend and colleague, John O'Loughlin, on his channel. And I'll be spending 60 minutes with him talking about the most likely the holidays, but I want to pick his brain some more about the William and Mary, his undergraduate institution, and learn a little bit more about the Huguenots, the Protestant establishment, and more specifically, I want to talk a little bit about the Knights Templar, which, by the way, show up in my analysis, my critique of the Pasadena Rose Bowl. I'll just leave it at that because we have a lot of material to cover here today. Also, another announcement, as I've been alluding to lately, and thanks again to my Patreon sponsors here. You allowed me to buy this book, which is probably, I'd say, overpriced. It's a rather ordinary autobiography from what I just got it yesterday, but I've been leafing through it. But it was priced around $50, and it's because I'm guessing now that just a few months ago, Anne Heche turned up a quote unquote suicide. And for those of you who are into your celebrity history, like I am, because it's more than about celebrities, as you probably know, it's about power. It's about power in society and power and influence. But more recently, another person, well, she was the lover, the girlfriend. I don't know if they were officially married, quote unquote, under the laws of the state of California, but they were together. They were a couple, Anne Heche and Ellen DeGeneres, Ellen DeGeneres, who has had this career doing a couple of failed sitcoms. And, I'm the situation comedy maven. If you look back a couple of talks ago, I posit the idea that someone like Kamala Harris and even someone like Barry Soetoro was brought through the system, through the popular culture, more specifically through Norman Lear and the black sitcoms of the early 70s for the entire decade, all the way including the introduction of polyandry and transgenderism via the Fresh Prince of Beverly Hills, right? Will Smith, remember that sitcom, Fresh Prince? And you might remember the Fresh Prince, and because he started out as a hip hop guy, and supposedly, then he was brought into the situation comedies. Then he was in this indie movie called The 6 Degrees of Separation, which has entered into the lexicon by now. He's had this progression here, and I don't know if that means he's going to be rolled up pretty soon, but because he's fulfilled his part of the devil's bargain, which we'll be talking about today in dealing more specifically with the work of Rabbi Jonathan Cahn. Now, this is not going to be a talk specifically about Rabbi Khan per se. Then there's all kinds of articles, popular articles. I haven't read any academic articles yet, but I'm sure they're in the works about his prominence within this larger field, which I'm only learning about now on a more concentrated level. I started hearing about Jews for Jesus in the late 60s and 70s, maybe in college. There was a whole um, Jesus movement, right? Different streams were coming out, and you have to think or wonder now, from what we know today, whether that was a psyop or not during the 60s, right? Some sort of intelligence agency means of trying to tamp down what remained of the political counterculture or the hippie movement or whatever it was. And some people say, well, the hippie movement so was the CIA. Well, maybe to some degree, yes. But if you're going to use that argument, then you'd also have to look at the Jesus movement of the 60s and 70s and beyond into the current time to question whether or not this is an intelligence operation as well. It's all open for discussion here. So, as you can tell by my preface here, I'm not coming to Rabbi Jonathan Cahn's work as an acolyte, as a disciple, as a promoter of his work. Rather, I am looking at Professor Jonathan, not Professor, I'll get to one of my professors who was influential in me being interested in religion at all. I mean, on an academic level, because I've always had a fascination with it since I was a kid. I was interested in 3 areas. I was interested in religion as a child because I saw how important it was to people's lives. Also, sex and love I was interested in, which did research work in that as well, and popular media. So these are lifelong pursuits of mine that I managed to fold into my professional career, and I still read widely in these related areas, and hence that's why I'm able to do the cultural forensics, right? The Professor Shlomo Hamamoto's cultural forensics, right? So this is, I believe, his Rabbi Khan's most recent book. I'm pretty sure. Have to double check because he's so prolific. Yeah, I can't keep up. It's called Return of the Gods. And notice the plural here. Yeah, trying to point here. Because the arguments has to do with the repaganization of American society. We've gone from a Jewish country, right? Judaism, that is, Christian, and the bedrock religious foundations. And whether you want to agree with how Rabbi Khan or others think any other, it's always up for dispute. Whether the founding fathers, so-called, were Freemasons or deists, or were they really Christian? I mean, that argument could consume an entire channel. I'm not even going to broach these topics. But his observation, I think, is prescient whether you are an observant Jew or a Christian or a Muslim or even a non-believer, an atheist, right? Although if you're an atheist, you might see the current trends that we're seeing today. They're more than trends; they've been institutionalized, such as is the institution of abortion. It's been institutionalized, even though U.S. Supreme Court has taken a different tack now and thrown it back down to the individual states. It's been institutionalized in Planned Parenthood, the medical establishment, the whole array of medicalized murder or death on a huge scale, which Rabbi Khan goes into, and he claims is, and I agree with him, claimed is one of the reasons why the United States as a nation is being judged, because we're engaged in these pagan practices that preceded the falls of the temple. In fact, God withdrew his grace, his favor on the ancient Hebrew people because they turned away from God. So, but whether you believe in the God narrative, as it's called in literary studies, and by the way, a lot of literary studies is very Torah like. It's very hermeneutical without the theology. And I know it because I studied it, and I that was part of my graduate training: literary criticism, film criticism, uh, cultural studies, cultural forensics was really hermeneutical and I would argue Talmudic in origins. And there's no coincidence that a lot of these academic disciplines were populated, overrepresented for the best, I would imagine, because let all the top talent rise to the to the apex of the field. If the Black American athlete is the top in basketball, then let all the basketball teams be primarily Black, because that's what human excellence is about, right? But anyway, that's an aside, and I'll touch upon that maybe sometime later. So anyway, I've got the Anne Heche book. Thank you very much. I'm going to go in on Ellen DeGeneres. That's why. And I ordered this book at the 9th of this month. All right. And this is before, to finish my thought. Sorry. I didn't complete the loop on this narrative line here, because I'm an improviser. I'm like, this is the song Equinox by John Coltrane. It starts out with a simple theme and it goes all over the place. And then you get back to the theme or the head, right? And I'm speaking of the equinox because, we're talking about solar astrological phenomena, maybe, right? It's a great tune, by the way. Check it out. It's very accessible, but and then takes you out into the stratosphere. All right. I like that sensation. And that's why I like to study celebrities. It seems mundane and even trivial, but if you look at it through a certain, or the Rose Parade, you look at it through a certain lens, and it just takes you in a whole different level of understanding and awareness. But anyway, to finish up, there was an individual, I think his first name is Michael. He's known professionally as Twitch, and later his name, his moniker, his stage name, his last name is Boss, Boss. So it's Michael Boss, Michael Twitch Boss. And I was told by a friend of mine who's also a dancer that when she knew him years ago, she didn't know him personally, but she knew about him professionally, and she went to a dance expo, and he was performing, giving workshops for all the kids and the adults, and I don't know, they sell leotards or dance skins or whatever it is. It's kind of like Comic-Con for popular dancers. But he was there, very nice guy, very friendly. If you've seen him on YouTube, he's got like a 1,000-watt smile. Even his eyes smile. Really, really cool guy. Nice, talented. Yeah, of course he's talented, but he's at least from what I could tell, a decent human being. So now all of a sudden we're being told that he had some kind of personal issues, and as a result he turned up dead by his own hand, supposedly, in a motel room not far from his own home, which he shared with his wife of about 9 years, I think. I'm sorry, the nitpickers can correct me if I'm off by 6 months or something. But I know he had 3 children too. They're all, below teenage, young children. So he left them behind. And he also happened to have been the staff DJ, the guy that spins the records when Ellen comes out and does her little, what passes for a funky dance, whatever. I don't know if she's making fun of him or if she's really that lame. And I'm looking back at some of the YouTubes, and she's just singing him to high heaven about what a great guy. He's a DJ, he's a dancer, and birthday party. I'm not an Ellen watcher. I've seen it a few times, right? And most of you would know more about the Ellen show than I do, but I was always creeped out by it. So I'm going to do a full talk on Ellen, and just ask some questions about how come Anne Heche and Twitch died within months of each other. Okay, what's going on there? By the way, Ellen DeGeneres is a resident of Montecito, California, Santa Barbara County. Remember I gave a talk about that earlier? Yeah, right? Oprah Winfrey, Queen Oprah, lives in Montecito. So does the British Prince Harry. I don't know if he's technically a prince anymore, but I'll just call him the British Prince, because I always preface with British because he's not my prince. We do not have hereditary royalty here. We have economic royalty, but we don't have hereditary royalty. And then Meghan Markle, I did a show on that, as you know, because I'm tuned into the zeitgeist. And sure enough, Yesterday, I binge watched 3 in a row episodes of the Harry and Meghan Markle show. They have a Netflix series, right? They're talking about their fishbowl existence as ex-royals who are now living in sunny California and Santa Barbara next to Oprah Winfrey and Ellen DeGeneres, and also the headquarters, Santa Barbara, that is, of the Institute for the Study of American Democracy. UC Santa Barbara is nearby, where the Temple of Set, Michael Aquino got his PhD in political science. I mean, and also Theosophy, very strong in that area. So are you seeing a little pattern there? Am I on it or what? No, I'm not really on it. I'm just following the thread here. I'm just going with the currents here. So we're going to go in on Ellen, and I got to get into the talk itself, but I wanted to give you an update on my. I know a lot of not a lot, but some of the tourists get pissed off because they want to see Rabbi Khan right up front. Oh, it takes 15 minutes before Goofball gets into the talk. Well, you know what? This is my show. And why don't you subscribe? Why don't you donate to my Patreon page? And maybe you might listen to your kvetch. That's Yiddish, by the way. All right. That's a complainer, a whiner. So if you want to kvetch, you got to pay Patreon, and maybe I'll listen to you. By the way, my Patreon people are the nicest people. They never kvetch. They're not demanding of me. Only the dickheads that come in the comment section. They're the ones, the guys who are the free riders. They're mostly guys, right? Low testosterone people. Which, by the way, I'm not alone in making that critique. All right, so don't call me was it androgynous? Yeah, androgynous phobic, right? Because that's all part of the return of the gods, the repaganization, right? Baphomet is a dual sexual or non-sexual. So we're going to do DeGeneres and the Rosicrucians on this coming Thursday. Now, for the tourists here who always are kvetching about what I'm not doing or should be doing, I talk a lot about my own relationship to the material that I'm sharing with you today because I've been around so long. I'm kind of like, I don't know, Tom Hanks, one of those characters, or the Zelig. I don't know if you ever saw that movie by Woody Allen. He's everywhere. He's been around these different circles. So, like Zelig, I just wanted to mention to you, just it might amuse you that since we're in the holiday season, right? I just was reminded because people are making fun of Schwanza or Kwanzaa or whatever. They're usually conservatives. And by the way, my feeling is that if you want to make up your own holiday, your own religion, go right ahead. I wish we didn't have to support you through your 501(c) scams, but Kwanzaa, I support it. And Kwanzaa, there's postage stamps. I think I have some somewhere. But anyway, the point is that I team taught a course at Cal State Long Beach. I'm trying to figure it. I think it's around 93, 4, 5, around there. Quite a while ago. I team taught a course with the Kwanzaa founder Maulana Karenga, and he used to be known as Ron Karenga back in the 60s, when he was involved in a shootout on the campus of UCLA, not far from where I hung out, right? There was an ethnic studies building there. There, Asian American studies was here, African American, and then they had Chicano studies. Now I think it's probably called Latinx studies. And there was a shootout with Bunchy Carter, his name Ron Karenga, right there. There's a whole history there. So I'm mentioning this to you. No, I wasn't involved in the shootout, but I was of that age. So we looked at, and it was happening on a university camp, UCLA, no less. Real guns, ladies and gentlemen, bullets. I know this is LA, but even for LA, it's quite unusual. And it turns out, though, that Ron Karenga was a Fed. He was an informant. All right, that's not me saying that this is what. But all that aside, he was a really nice guy, a gentleman, learned, scholarly, intelligent, serious intellectual. and the head of Black Studies or African American Afrocentric Studies at Cal State Long Beach. When I was there just for a year, and then I was kicked out. Fortunately, though, I got a better job, and that was at UC Davis. So one door shuts, another one opens. Um, Also at Cal State Long Beach, years before, because I was an undergraduate there. Imagine me years later teaching at my old alma mater. I never thought I would be teaching at the university level, like 95, with Ron Karenga, Maulana Karenga, no less, the founder of Kwanzaa. But during the 70s, I think around 73, 72 perhaps, I was fortunate to study with this gentleman here. His name is Professor Robert Eisenman. Let me just show you very quick, because he's still at it. He's retired, but
But it wasn't written by one person. There's 4 different gospels. There's a whole group of people involved in it. But one thing I will say, they're all basically Paulinists. So they're people who have already, been co-opted into the Pauline.
okay, you can you can tell just by this opening sentence. There's a lot of infighting in religious studies, and I bought one of his more recent books. It's called "Breaking the Dead Sea Scrolls Monopoly." Right, and I'm mentioning this because when we get into Rabbi Khan, it's not without its controversy. You're in religious studies. You're in talking about theology or your hermeneutics or patristics or whatever, or just simple biblical history. You're going to run into opposition and controversy. So don't bother putting those comments here. If you have something interesting or important just to say, do it. But don't try to ding me on chapter, line, and verse, right? Because I'm not competent enough. I'll tell you that. I'm just very interested in it. So yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls, because he was known, Professor Eisenman was known as being one of the premier explicators of what was then still fairly new discovery, right? You know about the Sea Scrolls and how it was found, in the jars and sold, and they were able to reconstruct a certain history of the Essene people, Essene, and try to reconstruct, who the historical Jesus was. And Professor Eisman has a view that's at odds with a lot of people. I'll just leave it at that level. But I did have the privilege of studying with him for 2 consecutive semesters at Cal State Long Beach. This is when undergraduate education was still uh, really fun, exciting, invigorating, and there was a true quest for knowledge and information. This is before it became ideologized, if there was such a word, before it was taken over by the PSYOP specialists. That's what's happened now. And I see it changing, by the way, because of the withdrawal of public support for ideological training. But anyway, I took to wrap it up here, took 2 courses with Professor Eisenman back to back. The first semester, the fall semester, was on the Old Testament, and the reading material is great. And he's a great lecturer, really good lecturer. I don't think he even used notes, but not just me, the whole class was spellbound. You could hear a pin drop when he was lecturing, and I think he probably gave me an idea that anything can be studied historically, sociologically, anthropologically, anything, even the Bible, even religious history. So that's how I'm going to be looking at Rabbi Jonathan Cahn today, not as an adherent, not as a critic, not as a theological nitpicker, right? Not as a schismatic, not as a messianistic believer myself, but just sort of as a social popular phenomenon. Okay. Oh yeah, and the second semester was New Testament. See how it broke down conveniently into. And I took a lot of religious studies. I took Buddhism. I took some comparative religion, and like I said, it's always been something fascinating with me. So when someone like Rabbi Jonathan Cahn hits the political zeitgeist or the popular zeitgeist, I'm interested. I'm inherently interested. And so I picked up his book. I think it was published in 2015. I checked on my Amazon account and it showed that I bought this book in 2015. It's called The Shemitah, right? So the idea that um, the history of the ancient Hebrews, the Jewish people, it breaks down into 7 year cycles, right? That's where the sabbatical, by the way, Sabbath, 7 days, right? Day of rest and sabbatical, which as a professional, I was able to go on sabbaticals. They stole the last one from me, instead decided to persecute me for the last year before they got rid of me. This is UC Davis. But I did manage to go on sabbatical, and that's one of the best parts of the job. That and July, August, September are the four best reasons for having a low paying academic job. That is the summer months and also sabbaticals which you get full pay every 7 years, at least at the UC system. So when you hear me kvetch about my career there, just take it with a pillar of salt, because it was the ideal career for myself, and I'm sharing with you some of these insights on the inside that no one else can, right? All the pop-up pundits and the armchair wizards that have come up, they don't have this background, they don't have this experience. So um, I'm I feel fortunate that I can share you these experiences with the man in the shootout at UCLA, the Quasi founder, and Robert Eisenman. Okay, we'll move on from there. Okay, so I got Shemitah in 2015 and read it, and you know, fascinating. I read books in along those lines anyway, right? Prophecy, pop history. I'll read about cults and sects. That's SECTS, but also SEX. But sex and all the different movements, quasi-religious. I'll probably be talking about Synanon fairly soon, right? I won't go into that, but anything with sort of religious overtones or straight on. In the Vatican, of course, who would not be interested in such an important institution as this, right? How can I overlook that? So when that came out, it piqued my interest, and since that time, think I've read most of his output. Like I say, he's prolific. I read Harbinger 2, and then most recently, in preparation for this talk, thank you again, my Patreonistas. You allowed me to get this 1995 DVD. It was worth every penny, though. It's The Harbinger's Things to Come. We might see an excerpt of it. You can see some of this on my Patreon, too, by the way. They allow a little bit of video memory to be used there. And it says #2 box office film in America. I don't know if it ever hit the theaters, but I do know that his books sell like routinely a million. All right, on that basis of alone, whatever you think about Jonathan Cahn or what I think about Jonathan Cahn is really irrelevant. As investigators, as quote unquote researchers, as cultural forensics people, anybody who is boasting those kind of numbers requires some sort of serious interest, attention, let's say. Okay. And the jury's still out so far as I'm concerned on what he really represents. Is he part of a larger psyop, or, because we've seen the Messiah psyop happen over and over again. It usually happens during times of crisis, right? Political crisis, economic crisis, political economic crisis, culture, and usually the cultural crisis reflects that. And I think it's safe to say that we are in the midst of crisis. We're not out of it yet. We were exposed to a physical crisis about 2.5 years ago, right? And by the way, that's in this book, and it's also mentioned in Harbingers, right? I'm not going to go into the details there, but you know what I'm alluding to. So here's another point of personal history. When I used to drive by drive on this, well, we called it the Santa Ana Freeway. It's Highway 5. It goes north and south throughout, from all the way from Mexico, all the way up the Pacific coast, out of California, Oregon, Washington, all the way to Canada. It's 5. But in my stretch where I lived in Orange County, it was called the Santa Ana Freeway. And right on off, you can see it from the freeway. There was a headquarters of Trinity Broadcasting Network. It was there for years, and I didn't really take much interest in it because this is, years ago. And then, as it turns out, as of today, it is the largest Christian broadcasting network in the world. Okay, and I live right by it. A 10-minute drive. It was in the city of Tustin. I lived in Irvine. I lived in Tustin as well. This is in Orange County. And I mention this because Trinity Broadcasting Network, or TBN, is one of the chief promoters of Rabbi Jonathan Cahn. And let me show you what I mean there. If you haven't seen him or you know what TBN is, this gives you kind of a feel for the operation.
Same way it happened with priests. I mean, we have our own form of priests. Same way, actually, more poor children, basically minorities, were killed because of this God, and it's happening the same way here. It's following like clockwork. You can say, how could they ever do that? We're doing it. We're following. This is what the gods do. This is what the pagan world did, and that's what we're doing.
Jonathan, it's great to have you back with us to talk about this blockbuster new book, The Return of the Gods.
Always great to be with you, Eric. And this is my backyard right now where we are. This is always a blessing.
True. Here in the NYC area, hey, you say that The Return of the Gods is the most explosive book you've ever written. Now, you wrote The Harbinger, which sold over 1 million copies and counting, but you say this is the most explosive yet. Why do you say that? What does The Return of the Gods reveal?
Yeah, this is a mystery that affects everything that's happening right now in our world, in our culture. What if that behind everything we're seeing, the changes of America, the what's happening to the children, what's happening to the media, behind that is an ancient mystery that goes back to the tablets of ancient Mesopotamia. What if the gods that we hear about, gods that we think, okay, that's fiction. Well, that they are in one sense, but what if there's a reality to them? What if there are actually beings linked to this? And what are they? Who are they? And what if they returned to our day now? What would happen? What if they are the invisible agents behind all these changes that are taking place in the classroom, taking place on television, taking place on our computer screens, taking place in the Supreme Court? What if it lies behind things like the sign of the rainbow, like what's happening to gender, what's happening in everything that's affecting everyone? What if one of the principalities or gods actually manifested in New York City, not far from where we are right now? What if that's happening? And the thing is, it is happening. It is real. It is right from the Bible. It explains. I mean, when we were talking before, when I first was sharing this, the one who was speaking to me said, this explains everything. Well, we're all dealing with it. Everyone who's watching right now is dealing with it. Every family is dealing with it. Every relative of that is dealing with it. We are all dealing with it in our lives. And so the Return of the Gods, is to remove the veil and to expose this, that we can see, because, we can't win if you don't know what you're fighting, and to empower God's people. And we'll be able to, there's so much to unpack. We'll be able to touch or give a taste of it. But I believe this is one of the most important things I could ever bring forth.
Jonathan, they say the first rule of war is to know your enemy. This is a spiritual war.
Yes.
What is the mystery of the spirits, number one? And number two, the book is titled The Return of the Gods, plural. Right. We know there's one God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but there is something deeper behind, as you said, these ancient demonic pagan entities.
Yeah, well, the Bible speaks a lot about the gods. It says, who is like you among the gods? The Lord says, I will execute judgment against the gods. Has a lot to say about that. And so what are the gods? Well, first of all over the world, there were gods. I mean, all over the world, every culture, it's kind of a strange phenomenon, was worshiping gods. Every culture. So why? And what is it? Why is it universal? Well, the Bible gives the answer. The Bible says in the book of Deuteronomy and in the Psalms, says they worshiped, or they even sacrificed their children to the gods, but the word it uses, the word the shedim. That's in the book. What are they? The word shedim means entities, beings, spiritual beings. Now, in ancient Babylon, they said they could be good or bad, but in the Bible it says, no, they're only bad. So it's the shedim. So it wasn't just these figments of people's imagination. Now, there was imagination and all, but it's that word. Now, when it was translated by the rabbis into Greek, they chose the word daimonia, which we get the word demon from it. And that is the word that actually Paul uses when he says the same thing. He says what the Gentiles, the pagans are worshiping, what they're doing, they're actually worshiping the daimonia or the shedim. These entities behind the gods are entities. So what it's saying is that again, not that the mythology is true, of course, the mythology, but that sometimes the mythology of man could follow what these things are, and these entities, demonic, can actually use the mythologies because what's their point? To bring worship away from God. I mean, so you would expect this. So the Bible says there's something very real going on. Yeah. So the question is, what would happen if these things that were there in the world, if they returned, which we'll get into. Yeah. The word daimonia, which we get.
Okay, according to Rabbi Khan, the Shedim have returned, and that's the repaganization that he also alludes to. And again, and I'm not making apologies for people who are believers in Christ or Jews or Muslims, people of the Abrahamic religions or others. Doesn't require any apology. It just really requires, is this what he's, Rabbi Khan, is what he's describing, does that square with historical reality? Yes, it does. He alluded to it in that excerpt right there, child sacrifice. And is it not true since Roe versus Wade that, and this can be quantified, 60 million babies were killed in the womb, all right? And it was presented to us as reproductive freedom, right? Part of the women's liberation. And of course, no one was thinking about transhumanism or the terminal end of humanity, of the human species, back when this was all being argued, right? In the midst of the so-called feminist revolution. But we're seeing where the end result has taken us as a nation. And of course, this is what Rabbi Khan describes when he, in his earlier film, The Harbinger, which hopefully I'll be able to show some excerpts in a moment, all the different tragedies, the chaotic events, all the way up to the recent biochaos that was inflicted upon us, and beginning in particular with the attack on U.S. soil against the Twin Towers of Babylon, if you will. But let me just finish up here or add to Rabbi Khan's notion of the Shaddiq, right? Let's see here. And this is from this recent book, which I heartily recommend, whatever your religious persuasion, because it lines up with including the rainbow flag, post-genderism, gender fluidity. Doesn't talk much about critical race theory that I can think about, but all the different abominations or affronts to what people call traditional values. And it's not just reactionary, because that's what the social engineers like to, how they like to characterize it. You're either a conspiracy theorist or you're reactionary. Well, like I explained many times before, I come from the left, liberal, progressive end of all. I went to grad school, right? So that's all you learn there. That's their catechism, right? But anyway, to add to Rabbi Khan's observations about child sacrifice, and he uses that phrase in this book and in some of his other talks. And I'm going to get into that before I leave this talk today. I'm going to leave you with a connection that I don't know who the gentleman is, but I found, and I checked it out. It's a real interview. It's not something that's made up, but I'm going to connect the insights of Rabbi Khan with the very existence of a demonic entity demonic construction that we all know and love, ironically, love as the U.S. private Federal Reserve, because that whole edifice itself was built upon the sacrifice of dead children, which I'll get to in a moment. But here you go. And this is Rabbi Khan writing here in chapter 76, the Valley of Hinnom. And I'm going to have to go to my books and find out the whole background. What is the valley? What is the Hinnom? I don't know. I'll look into it. It was the valley, I'm reading it here. It was the valley of Hinnom, the ground that bore witness to the depths to which the nation had descended in its fall from God. It was filled with blood, ashes, and little bones, the evidence of murder. The people had come to the valley to worship their new gods and, quote, burn their sons and their daughters in the fire. Does that not sound like Baal worship? Moloch, right? The prophet was Jeremiah, known as the, quote, unquote, the weeping prophet. For the tears he shed over his nation's fall, it was beyond his fathoming how a nation so blessed, this is ancient Israel, right? So blessed, so favored with promise, and so filled with a revelation of God could descend to the horrors in the valley of Hinnom. But the gods had accomplished it. These are the pagan gods, the Shenim, as he mentioned, Rabbi Khan mentioned in this previous excerpt. Okay, now I'm sorry, I'm not going to torture you with more reading here, but I just have to go conclude on a verbatim reading here to close the narrative line here. Millions on the altars, that's the subsection, this chapter. Reading, America had its own valley of Hinnom. It was every place in which the nation's unwanted children were put to death. Israel had killed thousands of its sons and daughters. America had killed millions. From the time that their murder was legalized in the early 1970s. Now, Rabbi Khan and his editors are very savvy. They do not mention court cases like Roe versus Wade. And through skillful editing, they managed to kind of sideslip political controversy while still getting the biblical and historical truth out to us. If you understand the context, you're going to have to unpack it. He's assuming you know a little bit of history here. From the time that their murder was legalized in the early 1970s, America had spilled the blood of approximately 1 million children every year. That's 60 million total. By the second decade of the 21st century, it had killed over 60 million of them. It was a valley of Hinnom of unfathomable proportions of endless blood, ashes, and little bones. All right. So he makes the comparison, and this is where people get a little nervous, right? He makes the comparison between America, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, right? And we've exceeded these other political constructions by far in the process of becoming such an incredibly powerful nation, right? Who is now facing judgment because of the succession of transgressions against God's law and against the law of humanity. But okay, that's the most dramatic end, that the most transgressive sin of all is that committed against children, unborn children included. But he also goes through the overturning of marriage, state of California, right? Quote unquote gay marriage. On a national level, I don't think you can be punished for marrying, same-sex marriage. We already talked about the Rainbow Revolution, which was all part of the social and cultural and political engineering of these entities, the Shinim, that have given us all these high-level miscreants, many of whom are being now rolled up, right? Because a system like this cannot exist. And these individuals who serve such a system will be judged and and meet justice in some fashion. They might be, killed in prison or something, or suicided, or accidentally something happens when they're in transport. Even if they're on $250 million bail at their parents' house, at the people that they serve don't want them talking, and they can wind up dead very easily. Anyway, so there's any number of examples that Rabbi Khan brings out, and I find myself agreeing with every single one of them. And I'm not a Messianic Jew or an Orthodox or Reformed Jew, or I don't even know if I would I'd say Christian. Yes, I don't even know if I would say Protestant, because we're talking about these religious institutions that have certain problems unto themselves, right? Which we don't need to get into in a moment. Now, one of the interesting aspects of the Jewish Messianic movement, and this is what I've been finding out as I've been preparing for this talk, is that, well, number one, it's not anything new. Jonathan Cahn did not invent it. In fact, he has a number of competitors right now, contemporary competitors, but he seems to be the number one guy right now heading the Messianic Jewish movement. And it's not just in the U.S. It's in all the quote unquote Christian countries, and even in Israel. There is a Jewish Messianic movement. And I won't go into the pros and cons of it and the disputes and the suspicions and mutual recriminations going on. You could read about that on your own. But it is worth noting that, because, we saw the example on TBN that 70% who were involved in the Yeshua, which is one of the markers of people who are part of the movement, not Jesus, Yeshua, part of the Jewish Messiah movement. They're Gentiles. They're Protestants. They're TBN viewers or watchers, or belong to a Protestant denomination, but proclaim belief in the Yeshua as a Messiah. On the other hand, the public face, and this is from an article I read, this is not my own insight because I don't have those percentages down. This is done from a sociologist of religion, did a survey, is in the public face of the Jewish Messiah. By the way, if you want to see these articles, put that down in the comments. Say, I want to read some of these articles. Let's say you're looking for a term paper, a research paper for when you get back to school in February, or a couple of weeks or so, or your grandchildren are looking. I'll give you some literature, sort of like a starter kit, right? You can. And I'm sure your professors would love the topic, because this is really hot, right, in the popular culture, and they would enjoy reading it. If your professor enjoys reading the paper, enjoys it, and they might not even agree with it, but if they enjoy reading it, you will get an A, because most of the papers are so boring, not because they're boring, but because they're copycats. They're just synthetic. Right, they're just borrowed, plagiarized, if you will, from. So this is a good topic. So if you put that in the comments there, that's something constructive that you can do instead of nitpicking. Say, hey, I want to see these articles, and I'll post them for free in the public and my Patreon, so you can download. But I'm not going to do it unless there's a demand, because these articles are academic, and you have to rise to that level of discourse, and not the other way around, not the watered down stuff that you see on TubeView. But it's important, and I rely on it, not because I'm from that world, because it's more penetrating, I think. Not any more valid, but they provide, hard information. 70% of people are involved in Christian messianism are Gentiles, that is Protestant. And the face of the Jewish Messiah movement are Jews who are Jews at birth, people like Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, right? And like I said, he has a lot of competitors going on. Just look on YouTube under that, and there's all kinds of people who are in that movement. By the way, this movement goes back, like I said earlier, in the 60s, I started hearing about Jews for Jesus and all these other organizations that were, new to me, right? Part of the new religious revival of the 60s. But it goes back even further than that. And if you're a historian or you're interested, you can trace that down as well. But the point is, it has an extensive history. Jonathan Cahn did not come from anywhere. He is just the most recent iteration of something that's been going on in American religious or secular culture, cyclically, not every 7 years. Usually it's, so long that we forget that this has happened before. But and that doesn't diminish his contribution. I still think he's a very important voice for what's taking place around the world, not just in America, in 2022 going into 2023. And I'll keep reading his work and buying his documentaries and checking him out on YouTube. Now, what are some of the possible criticisms of Rabbi Khan? I came across a couple of academic articles that reject the whole attempt, the whole idea of Jews finding Yeshua, right? And then I also find articles by Orthodox or Reformed Jews who say, no, this is an infiltration. You're poaching on our Jewishness and saying that you have to follow Yeshua. So he's kind of caught between these two factions, and that's to be expected. That was not a surprise to me when I'm reading this, but I was reading some other articles of possible criticisms of Khan that are not so intuitive. And that is, one is the notion, and I found this article of the notion that there are many Protestants or Christians who are wannabes. He uses that term in the title, wannabe Jews, right? And I said, well, why? But then he uses the historical example of wannabe Native Americans, wannabe Indians, right? And you've seen this, right? You go to some festival or some sort of alternative event, and there's, Anglos who are getting into Indian spirituality, New Age, all kinds of. Within my ethnic group, I saw the gradual takeover of a Buddhist church, which was almost 100% run and led by Japanese Americans, right? Founded, led, and financed by Japanese Americans. And almost all of them now there are no Japanese Americans involved in the leadership. They've been completely hijacked, which is one of the reasons I will not support them. Even the Japanese American National Museum is not run by Japanese Americans. It's run by outsiders. So I can understand the fear, the trepidation that Jews would have when you say, yeah, okay, in the name of Yeshua, come on in and share all the largest with us and all the good feeling and whatever else. It's co-optation. It's wannabe. You see wannabes. I grew up in an era where to be Japanese background had the worst stigma attached. It was like World War II ended in 1945, right? And I was born, some years after that, but I was still living this, and we're still seeing this sort of, like I keep complaining, the same anti-Chinese, anti-Japanese, particularly East Asian sentiment. I'm going to talk more about that when I get into the Rose Bowl, right? But today in 2022, you go to the major city like a Tokyo or something, and it's full of what they're called weeaboos, or they're at home here. They're total manga nuts or anime nuts. And they learn, Japanese, what they think is Japanese culture, like that. So we've gone from being, reviled to being, really cool, right? And I would never let my mother pack a rice ball, musubi, onigiri, I wanted a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? But it only became cool to eat sushi once Anthony Bourdain said, yes, you can have a sushi now. It's no longer an ethnic food. It's ours. Right. So I kind of understand about this wannabe concept, right? There's also, and I'm running out of time here, but there's also, just to be more even-handed here, there's also the possibility of a Barnum effect being at play, as in P.T. Barnum. And I'll let this YouTuber here explain who P.T. Barnum was and what the psychology of P.T. Barnum, but very quickly, what it means is that, yeah, this makes sense. right? But it's kind of like reinforcing what's already there. We already know that's going there, and you're presenting, you're intensifying, or you're re-narrativizing something we already know and are feeling and experiencing. But it seems like prophecy. All right, that's not quite what the P.T. Barnum effect is, but I'll let this lady explain. Just a couple of minutes worth.
There. Today, we're going to talk about the Barnum effect. Before we get started, take a minute to subscribe to Psy vs. Psy. Help out your friendly neighborhood psychologist while I tell you all about the Barnum effect. Phineas Barnum, notorious showman, businessman, circus and sideshow owner. He's mostly remembered for being kind of a shyster. He's known to have fraudulently promoted hoaxes and was even accused of creating a couple. He possibly abused and definitely manipulated many people, and so it's no wonder that the psychological effect that carries his name is all about leading people to believe things that aren't necessarily true. The Barnum effect, which is also sometimes called the Forer effect, is when individuals believe that descriptions apply particularly to them, even though that description is actually information that could apply to anyone. An easy way to think about it is when people take non-scientifically valid personality tests and think that the really vague descriptions given at the end are very true about themselves. For instance, say I take a BuzzFeed quiz called "What is your inner potato?" and answer questions about my favorite kind of dog or what superpower I'd want, and then the quiz spits out all this really nice information about how I'm super great. Really, that descriptor at the end about how I'm so great is pretty vague and could be applied to just about anyone. It doesn't really say much about me specifically. That's the Barnum effect. A vague, usually flattering description that could really apply to just about anyone.
Okay, you get the general idea. This applies more specifically in this case to horoscopes, fortune telling, divination, but it's also going to be applied to prophecy, prophets, and they're like a dime a dozen even today, and which is kind of nice that people can still take that leap into mystery and throw all the science behind. It can still say, yes, it's been ordained, it's been prophesied. Right, the prophetic vision is still permissible in this hyper-rationalistic science technocracy, if you will. Anyway, but let me close the loop here for this storyline here. Remember when Rabbi Khan talks about in his opening dialogue on TBN about the sacrifice of unborn children, and then in this book here, the passage I just read, about the 60 million unborn children that were sacrificed on the altar of convenience, expedience, or career advance, or whatever rationalizations that Gloria Steinem or some academic feminist professor at UC Davis, in Chicana studies, building altars to abortonado to tell the new incoming 17, 18, 19-year-olds Chicanas that, that they got to start thinking socialist and communist and global and forget everything that their familia has taught them and start talking about abortonado. And I'm going to find that clip of that shrine that's celebrating in Hart Hall, UC Davis, of the Chicanics sort of ideological reconditioning of a community that's very much religious and God-centered, Catholicism primarily, but also evangelical. But once they get out of the university, their minds are going to be scrambled forever. So I'm going to try to find that. Speaking of fires and altars and sacrifice and burnings, let me just give you a brief clip here of this. And by the way, you can find it on my Patreon there. I think I'll repost this. I'll make it public though, so everybody can see it. Because I don't have time to play the whole 9-minute clip. But this clip talks about how the private Federal Reserve, I don't need to go into it. Most of the people who are watching this are up to speed on that, G. Edward Griffin and, Creature from Jekyll Island, right? That Jekyll Island, how this anthropologist, I believe he is, went to Jekyll Island and was told by the park ranger that there were altars that they found. They found these artifacts that were very similar to Canaanite altars, like in the Middle East. But this was like off the coast, this is an island off the coast of Georgia, the state of Georgia in the USA, not Soviet Georgia, right? And that what they found were artwork as well as material artifacts and evidence of child sacrifice that were taking place on these stone altars on Jekyll Island. And you know the story about Jekyll Island and the J.P. Morgan and all the financial oligarchs that enslave us today going into 2023. By the way, that's one of the reasons for the Great Reset, is because the World Economic Forum and the Rothschild, all those people know that we understand the history now. So they have to do a switcheroo real quickly because the knowledge has caught up finally with the century long criminality here. That's not based just on financial legerdemain, but on spiritual debasement, which is the sacrifice of children on these pagan altars, right here in what later became the United States of America, because the financial oligarchs of Jekyll who convened in Jekyll Island built their cottages, their summer homes on these sacrificial altars where children were sacrificed. So that is the origin of the private U.S. Federal Reserve. And once people begin to understand the occultic nature of our very financial system built upon such evil, right? Demonism, as Rabbi Khan pointed out, right? There's a Hebrew word for it, but I'll use the Greek translation, the demonic. Then you're going to see that edifice begin to crumble, because that was the missing element, right? G. Edward Griffin was fine for what he did and traced the history and all that. But what was missing is the metaphysical brick, or the metaphysical foundation upon which this financial system was constructed, right? So anyway, might not make any sense, but look at my Patreon. I'll load this up to the free site. The free part, there's public and there's Patrons at different level, because you got to watch this and you got to share it with everybody you know.
The first colony of French folks that came over to try to establish a colony on the coast. And he said they landed in Jekyll Island and they had some interaction with these Indians. And then they got so appalled by what they saw and witnessed that they fled at night and ended up in St. Augustine, Florida, and established that city. So I said, were they the Huguenots who were the French group that established St. Augustine? He said, yes. I said, well, I'd like to see that painting then. So he pulls that out. I'm looking at it, and it shows the Indians and all their regalia, and they're dancing around and having some kind of ceremony, and it's got the fire, and it's a typical, either they're having a party or they're having a war scene, and it has some things with the weapons. So I said, gosh, this has got some weapons in it that clearly validates the archaeology that they found. And then I see an altar. And I'm going, I don't know of a Native American tribe anywhere in the country. I know some that had log houses or high places or worshipped, nature in some way, or had totem poles or that kind of stuff. But this one has a stone altar, and it looks a whole lot like the one that I had dealt with in the Middle East. And I'm looking at the picture, and I'm going, is this an altar? Is this stone like something they're sacrificing on? Because this guy's holding babies in his hands in this picture. He said, yeah, they're cutting those babies, they're hacking those babies up in that painting. And so when you look at the details, two of the shamans or chiefs are holding a baby up by the ankles, and they're whacking their heads off and spilling the blood on this altar. And
Okay, it goes on for another 7 minutes or so, and you can see. I don't know if Rabbi Khan is even familiar with that story or that clip, but it reinforces, underscores what he has come up with or has observed independently of this anthropologist or archaeologist. I'm not really sure what his training is, his specialty is, but the point again, the larger point again, is that these sacrificial altars was the foundations upon which the private Federal Reserve was built, right? They built their cottage because the park ranger said, no, we can't show you the altar. He says, why not? He says, because the houses were built on top of the stone sacrificial altars. That's why not. So something to ponder as we move into 2023, and it now makes it a little bit more understandable why there's a hurry up 2-minute warning, 2-minute drill, right? For the Great Reset people to move us into their crypto world here, because the history is now understood, right? And the history has been coming out from amateurs, right? Skilled, talented amateurs, not from the academic world, because they're all owned by the Nephilim, right? Who have created the universities and the fraternities and the sororities, and they fund the quote unquote science, and they fund the opposition, and they right, the whole military Pentagon land grant system is all wrapped in the intelligence world, is all wrapped up in it. In spite of all that, the wisdom of the ages is coming back, right, to help us, to assist us. And this knowledge has been invaluable in forestalling the end game that has been planned for us. And with a little bit more research and political will, we will be able to turn it back, because we've seen that as being part of history as well. But the first step is to really know this material, understand it, and act accordingly. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's my time. I hope you benefited from this fascinating talk. I hope you share it with your friends and neighbors and your family. And I'll see you, God willing, on Thursday when we go into the tournament of Rosicrucians, Pasadena. All right, thank you. Bye.